Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Future Ready Leadership. My guest today, Sahil Bloom. He's the author of a brand new book called The 5 Types of Wealth, and he's also the creator of a very popular newsletter, which I think is slowly approaching 1 million subscribers, called the Curiosity Chronicle newsletter. Sahil, thank you for joining me.
Thanks so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
It's funny, I've been following a lot of your stuff on X for a long time. You're all over X, you're on LinkedIn, your stuff is popping up all over the place. So
I can't get used to calling it X, by the way. I refuse to make that change mentally.
You still call
it's
it Twitter?
Still Twitter to me.
Yeah, I'm sure Elon appreciates that. Why don't we start with a little bit of background information about you, because you've done some pretty cool things over the years. So why don't you take us back, even maybe to the baby Sahil days, and how did you get to where you are today?
The baby Sahil days. I grew up on the East Coast, back in the Boston area primarily. I come from a mixed race background. So my mom is from India, born and raised. My dad is a white guy from the Bronx, New York, and that kind of collision of two worlds was really foundational for my life. And the reason I say that is because I would say that my parents' sort of rejection of common convention has been something that was ingrained in my DNA from the start. When my mom and dad met, they crossed over by about 2 weeks in college and fell in love. And when they wanted to get married, my dad's family didn't accept it and forced him to choose between her and them. And he walked out the door and never saw his family again. In what was a very sort of tragic and grief-inducing situation, an incredible love was sparked from it. And 40 plus years later, they're still married and role model for an incredible relationship and what a marriage should look like to me. But that rejection of the common convention and that decision to choose love, I feel like has been something that has been passed down through our family and into my sister and I as we've grown up. And so throughout my life, I feel like at every step of the journey, I had this underlying force of the desire to question the assumptions, question the cultural defaults that underlie so many of the decisions that we naturally make. And so as we wind forward in time, I feel like that has been a common theme that has appeared again and again in my life that I credit my parents for as a result. I ended up going to college. I played baseball in college. I got a scholarship to pitch at Stanford University out in California, played for 4 years there. Stayed and did my master's, and then basically started marching down this very traditional path. So I took a job at a private equity fund that was just getting started. For anyone that doesn't know what that is, basically you're investing in businesses, buying and selling businesses. It wasn't quite as crazy or sexy or unsexy, depending on how you define it, as like the barbarians at the gate era that you might have read about. We were basically investing in family-owned businesses and then trying to support them and generally grow those businesses over periods of time. Had an incredible experience. I was there for 7 years full-time, co-led consumer investing for the last few years of that. And really for the first 4, was just drinking from a fire hose intellectually. And my curiosity was, piqued on a daily basis. I was learning a ton, had an incredible experience, and then sort of got to this point where I just realized that everything in that world was around trying to make money. And I was doing that. I was making more and more money each and every year. I was getting patted on the back. Externally, you would have said things were going great, that I was winning the game, that I was killing it. But internally, as I was kind of scaling the ladder, everything was falling apart. And that was everything from my relationship with my wife, who was the most important person in the world to me, to my friends, to my relationship with my parents, who I wasn't seeing on a regular basis, to my health. Really everything was kind of slowly withering away while I was getting the constant affirmation of doing well and of succeeding. And in 2021, that really came to a head. And I realized that if I didn't change something, I was going to end up in a place where I didn't want to end up.
Yeah.
And so I made a change, and now here we are.
Wow. And so what was the change? I guess you're kind of off on your own, obviously. And so what are you doing these days?
Primarily creative work. You mentioned the book, the writing, the Curiosity Chronicle. I left my job in May of 2021, and I didn't really know what I was going to do next. I had started writing on Twitter or X, back in May of 2020, really because I was stuck at home during the pandemic and had all this time on my hands and needed something to do that was productive while I was stuck at home during those lockdowns. And so I started writing. I started finding that there was resonance in the things that I was sharing, that people were interested in the topics I was writing about. I've always just absolutely loved thinking about the human condition, thinking about different experiences, how you can apply your own lens to these universal experiences that we all go through, and how to help people ask better questions to come to their own answers in their own lives. And that was fundamentally what I was writing about. And so it started on Twitter, it expanded into this newsletter that started to grow. And in 2021, I really just made the decision that I was going to go all in on this, that I had a ton of energy around it, that if I continued down the path of the cultural default of just trying to make more and more money in this stable track I was on, that I wasn't going to like the outcome at the end. Yeah. And I wanted to try my hand at my own thing. And so I proceeded to do that and have been really focused on the creative work over the last few years. I've built a bunch of businesses around that, sort of adjacent to it, raised an investment fund of my own, and have just had a pretty wild ride over the last few years.
Yeah, it sounds like it. And it sounds like this all started with this idea of asking questions, which I love. But there's also kind of a big challenge, especially I think in the corporate world, when it comes to asking questions, right? Because it seems, at least in today's business environment, if you ask questions, if you challenge assumptions, you don't get rewarded for that in the corporate world. A lot of people kind of want you to fall in line. They don't want you to ask questions. They don't want you to be a nuisance. When you were in the corporate world, did you see that at all? Were you encouraged to ask questions and to challenge ideas? Or was it kind of like, hey, here's our process. Why don't you just follow our process, be quiet, do what you got to do, and go home at the end of the day?
Yeah, the way I think about it is there are environments where your goal is to punch the clock. Yeah. And get the basics done every single day, basically to avoid the unforced error. And if you do that over long periods of time, you generally find a path to succeed. And sometimes in your career, that's actually the best thing you can do is, this realization, frankly, that your career does not have to be your purpose in life. Yeah. There's this common, theme or meme on the internet that I have to find purpose in the work that I do. And yep. I have to, love what I do every single day. That's not really true in my opinion.
I completely agree. And I'm very glad you're saying that.
Yeah, I think what you do need to do, and what's much more important, is connect your work to your purpose. So what do I mean by that? My purpose as a person is maybe to provide for my family. Let's say that's my higher order purpose. That's the thing that I wake up and get energy from, is to provide for my wife, for my children on a daily basis. I might hate my job, but if I can connect my job to that purpose, if I can show up to work realizing that I am fulfilling my purpose by doing this, that work is not my purpose, but it's connected to the higher order purpose that I have. I'm going to show up with way more energy on a daily basis doing that thing, whatever it is, punching the clock and showing up. And so I think that distinction is a really important one for people to internalize. You don't have to absolutely love every single day of your job. You don't have to have your job be your purpose, but you do need to connect it to whatever your purpose is.
Yeah, it's one of the reasons why I get so frustrated with all these organizations out there. They invest so heavily in these well-being programs, and they're always talking about, we want to help our employees find their purpose. And it's sort of like you remove any agency from the side of the employee. You sort of assume that the employee just shows up to work every day as like this blank canvas, and it's your job as the company to give them purpose. But to your point, yeah, I mean, if you have purpose outside of work, which hopefully a lot of people do, just because you have a bad day at work or a bad week or even a bad month at work doesn't mean that you have a bad job. I mean, there are lots of things that I do that I'm sure you do that are annoying, that you don't like doing, that are frustrating, whether it's invoices or accounting or whatever it might be. I hate doing that stuff. It doesn't mean I hate my job and that I'm going to abandon everything. And to your point, I love that you mentioned that connecting your purpose to the work that you're doing instead of assuming that the work that you do is going to be the source of all of your purpose. And I think a lot of companies today really have that message backwards. So for a lot of people out there who are listening and watching this, and they're trying to figure out, well, how do I guess step one would be to identify what that purpose is, which I don't know. I think a lot of people, if you were to ask them that, I would assume that a lot of them would have a response. I don't think a lot of people are just floating around in the world saying, I don't know what I'm doing here or how I got here or where I come from. Or, I think a lot of people have some kind of direction, but maybe connecting what they're doing to the work is where a lot of people struggle. So maybe the first part, do you agree with that? Do a lot of people have something figured out? And then how do you connect it to the work?
Yeah, I mean, on the first part, I think it's a overwhelming question to ask yourself, especially in your like 20s and early 30s. Like if you haven't established your personal life, like your family, like if you don't
Yeah,
have
that's
a
true.
partner, children, family members you're taking care of, etc. It's an overwhelming question to say, what is my purpose on this planet? I think it's easier in some ways to ask about your identity. Like, who are you? Who do you want to be in the world to the different people in the different circles that you're around? What does the world need from you in this moment? And that's an important question. What does the world need from you? Because that's not really about making money. That's not really about the world. The world could be defined as your sphere of friends and family. The world could be defined as the company that you're working at. The world could be defined in a number of different ways. But that question of saying, what does that world need from me? Is it to be a provider? Is it to be a teammate in this situation? Is it to be, a thought leader, someone pushing things forward, someone who's changing the narrative or the discussion around things? What does your world sort of need from you in that moment? People think that they want wealth, fame, success, money, all of these things, when really what they're searching for is identity. You're trying to find how you fit into the world. Whatever your world is, you're trying to understand who you are, how you fit into that, how you're creating value for the people around you within that ecosystem. And so when you have that pulled away, or when you're struggling to find that, that is that's the real tough point for a lot of people. And so what I always have found as a useful exercise is to ask that question, like, what does the world need from me in this moment? How can I provide that? And that fundamentally comes down to being useful. I mean, I love this line. So Charlie Munger, who one of the world's most famous investors, recently passed away. He had a conversation with Jason Zweig, the Wall Street Journal writer, and Zweig asked him, what would you want people to say about you? Like, what would you want in your obituary after you're gone? And he said that I tried to be useful. And I thought that that was such a fascinating line that, one of these, individuals who's like arguably one of the most successful people in history, and how he defined what he did in his life was that he tried to be useful. And it's such an important way to think about the world. Like, how can I be useful in every situation that I encounter? How can I be useful to my family, to the people around me? How can I be useful to my team members, to my friends? That I have found as to just a very centralizing thought, something that kind of grounds you in what's really important.
Yeah. I like that a lot. I'm actually reading Poor Charlie's Almanac. I think it came out a year ago or so, but the stories he has in there, all his essays from the talks that he gave are really inspiring. And just hearing you talk, I was trying to remember how I felt when I was in my early to mid 20s. And yeah, I mean, I had no idea what the hell I wanted to do. And similar to you, I thought I was going to join the corporate world and stay there for a long time and get my MBA and then just go back to the corporate world and, I don't know, become like a CMO one day at an organization. And I'm trying to remember if I can identify at what point I figured out the path that I wanted to go on. And I'm not sure. Maybe it was at the time I met my wife. Maybe,
I mean, the
like, I
secret
don't know.
is
It's
you
'cause I
never
was
really
wondering.
figure it out.
I think it's like a set of, yeah. But I mean, there was like a certain, I guess it was maybe a series of things that happened that came together where I realized, okay, maybe I'm onto something. I mean, maybe it was a combination of being independent and moving out of my parents' house after college, with seeing success in trying to build my own business, with meeting my wife and saying, okay, maybe I found a partner. You know what I mean? Like, I feel like it was a few things that came together where I realized, okay, maybe I'm moving in that right direction. And of course, having kids was a huge one. For people who have kids, it totally changes your life, and you definitely have that sense of purpose and meaning when you have that family there. But it's a really interesting question, because I wonder if when you're in your 20s, if it's possible, like your early 20s specifically, maybe that's the period where maybe it's okay to acknowledge that you don't have that yet. And part of your job should be to experiment and to play around and to taste test different things and to kind of navigate. I don't know. Do you agree with that? Because I feel like a lot of people, maybe it's life stages, right? Because there are also people in their 20s who are married, who do have kids, who have built successful businesses. So it's much more of things that happen to you in your life as opposed to the age that you
I mean,
are.
look, I like this video game analogy that I often use when I kind of coach or mentor young people, which is when you start out your life, you are on a big black map. You can't see anything. You're just in the one spot where you got dropped, where there's light. And that's all you can see right now. Your job over your 20s and early 30s is to go shine a light on the entire map. And the only way you do that is by saying yes to almost every opportunity that comes your way. You just take things on. You drink from a fire hose. You go, you put yourself way out over your skis. You take on the things that scare you. That's shining a light on all of the opportunities that are out there, all of the different lines of work, all of the different people, the different relationships, the different areas of insight that you didn't have when you just started out. Then you can spend your 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, all the way until you die, chipping away at that one spot where you know the gold is. And the point there is important, which is if you just start in the one spot where you landed and you just started chipping away, you have no idea if that's the right spot for you to chip away at for the rest of your life. You have no idea. It could be anywhere on that black map. So if you don't spend your 20s and early 30s shining a light, you have no idea if you picked the right spot to chip. And so the best use, in my opinion, of your 20s and early 30s is to do that. It is to go shine a light on this broader map, to explore before you start going and digging deeper in this one area. The other way to think about it, just from a purpose standpoint, if you need help defining it, is that early part of your life is all about building the foundation of your life house. And you can build your foundation in a number of different ways, but that is really your purpose. Your purpose is to build a strong foundation, and that foundation can be built around a level of financial stability. That foundation can be built around some core strong relationships that will run the gamut of your entire life. It can be built around health and a stable base of health and fitness that is going to be held with you for the rest of your life. Those things, those knowledge, the wisdom, the things that you accumulate that build the foundation of that house, that is your purpose in those young years, because then in your later years, you have a stable foundation that you can build on top of. If you build a flimsy foundation, you're going to really struggle later in life. And we've all seen that. People that really struggle in their 20s and early 30s to build that foundation have a tough time building on top of it later in life.
How do you know you've done it? Like, are there some markers that you could look at if you're in your 20s, or I guess any age for that matter, where you can look back and say, I've built a solid foundational house where I've been able to identify and establish that purpose? Because even a lot of people today, they're in their 40s, maybe even their 50s, they're still kind of like, well, I don't really know what I'm doing. I don't feel that kind of purpose. So how do you know
I think generally speaking, by the way, that sensation of, well, I'm not really sure. I don't know if this is the right decision. That's ultimately just an overthinking problem. And the overthinking problem plagues many people. And, I think of it as like 90% of overthinking just comes from this desire to focus on perfect planning rather than on adaptability. And what do I mean by that? Well, when you are making a big decision, or any decision for that matter, and you're starting to overthink, it's because you think that the plan has to be perfect, not that you can just adapt on the fly. And like an explorer, when they set out on a voyage, they're not trusting that their plan is perfect and that the seas are going to be perfectly calm and clear for them to get to where they're trying to go. They're trusting in their ability to adapt when the inevitable storms and chaos occur. And in your own life, you are that explorer, right? You don't need the perfect plan. You don't need everything to go according to a perfect plan. You need to build and prepare adaptability to navigate whatever it is that comes your way. You need to just make a decision and then make it right through the actions that you take after the fact.
So part of it is just accepting and understanding that there is a bit of anxiety and uncertainty and difficulty and challenge, and just knowing that that's part of the process. And it doesn't mean that you're, kind of wandering in
Yeah,
the
and you
world
never
without a
know
flashlight, so
how
to
these
speak.
things are going to work out. I mean, Steve Jobs said it well in his commencement speech in
Yeah.
2005 at Stanford that you can't connect the dots looking forward. You can only connect them looking back. And so you can't make decisions thinking, oh, this is how these dots are going to connect to me ending up starting this amazing company or building this amazing life. You need to make the best decision you can in the moment and trust, have faith that those dots are going to connect in reverse. The best example I've ever heard of this, by the way, was from a mentor related to Steve Jobs, Tim Cook, who obviously has had an incredible career as the CEO at Apple. And he has a fascinating career story that he was at IBM rising through the ranks in this like very stable, safe corporate program that they had. And, he was on the executive track at IBM. And Steve Jobs was recruiting for this senior role in operations at Apple and saw Tim's resume in the pile, looked at it and said, oh, this is like, a boring IBM guy. This isn't the right person, not the right fit for a career at Apple. So he passed on him. 6 months later, he was still recruiting for that same role and saw Tim's resume again. This time, Tim had left IBM and gone and taken a job at Compaq, which was this kind of like weird computer startup at the time. So Steve in his mind said like, oh, this person's actually different than I thought. There was a pattern interrupt, if you will, to his life. So now he saw the resume and said, that's kind of a weird decision that doesn't look like what I thought this person was like. Interviewed him, ended up hiring him, and the rest is history in his life. Tim never could have known in the moment when he took that job at Compaq that it was going to lead to what his life's work was going to be at Apple. But it did. He made a single decision that he had no idea how it was going to turn out, and it ended up being the one thing that flipped the switch for him to find his purpose and build this incredible life that he's built and create all the value that he's created. That's just a perfect example to me of exactly that. Is you have to make the decision and then see how you can adapt, see how you can navigate that chaos along the way and along the path.
Yeah, Apple's a good example. They're one of the few companies out there where the CEOs, whether it's Steve Jobs or Tim Cook, stay there for a long time. At so many organizations, you're the CEO for 1 year, for 2 years. I mean, look at what happened to Starbucks. Look at so many organizations out there, they turn over CEOs like nothing, and their whole C-level executive team. But Tim Cook has been there for many years, Steve Jobs many years before that. And I actually didn't know that story about Tim Cook, but it's kind of interesting how that happened. So how do you connect that to work? Because you were talking about earlier, don't look for your purpose at work, but sort of bring your purpose to work and kind of connect it. So I don't know, let's say I'm in marketing or human resources, or I'm on an assembly line or something like that. How do you bridge that gap between the purpose that I have versus
I think it's a
the
daily
work that
awareness. So it's not going to be every single moment of every single day are you feeling that connection. But the moments when you start to feel yourself wandering, you need to remind yourself, you need to pull yourself back in, if you will. So say I work on an assembly line and I'm kind of grinding away, punching the clock every single day. But I define my purpose around, being the type of father that coaches my kids' little league teams. And that's how I really define myself in my life.
Yeah.
Well, one day when I find myself sort of really dreading it or just not finding the energy at work, not showing up as the best version of myself, I can reconnect to that. I can think about the fact that I'm showing up to this little league team and that my son is going to know that I'm the type of person that shows up and punches the clock, that my son is going to be learning those lessons from seeing me and seeing how I operate on a daily basis. Now, suddenly, I'm taking a lot of pride in the type of work that I'm doing because I know the lessons that it's extending to this person that I love and to this purpose that I have. So I think it's finding those ways on a daily basis to just pull yourself out, zoom out to that higher level and realize why you're doing the thing and what it's creating for you. Similarly, if you're 20 and you're working in marketing and maybe isn't your favorite thing in the world, but your purpose is to build this foundation, think about that on a daily basis. What are some of the insights that I can gather about what I like and about what I don't like that are helping me build this foundation within my life? And now, even the bad days are useful because they're data points, and those data points are helping create that solid foundation.
I remember I interviewed on this podcast, I think it was last year, the CEO and chairman of Panera Brands, Niran Chahandri, I think is how you say his last name. And I asked him a similar question, and he told me that he views his life on kind of like this spoke model. And he said the big problem that a lot of people have is they assume that their job or their careers, or you pick one thing, that's their whole life. And he says, I view it as a series of spokes. And so he's like, well, I'm a son, I'm a father, I'm a musician, I'm a CEO, I am a partner, I'm like all these different things. And he said, it's not possible for me to be perfect in all those things every day. And that if I struggle in one of those things, like let's say I knew I did something bad at work today, I was a bad CEO, I was a bad leader, he doesn't let that kind of destroy him. He then tries to look at those other spokes and say, well, I wasn't that great at work today, but I was a really good dad. I was a great husband today. I spent time playing the guitar. And so he looks at, and I love that analogy of looking at your life as kind of a series of these different things. And just because you struggle in one doesn't mean your whole life falls apart. But I think the challenge a lot of people have is they only look at one or maybe two things instead of all the different roles they play, all the different things that they can contribute. And if you only view it as one thing, when that one thing collapses, and if you have a bad day, you're done. It's very hard to claw back from that. So it very much reminds me of what you're saying there. And the second thing that I thought of is, did you ever see this video called The Power of 10?
Yeah, well.
So you might want to watch it. You'll like it. It's I think it's from the 80s or 90s. And the idea of the power of 10, which I think you almost literally said, this idea of zooming in and zooming out. It looks at like this couple. They're laying on the grass having a picnic. And then it zooms out 10. And then you see, well, now they're having a picnic, but now you see the whole park. Then it zooms out again. And then you see the city. Then it zooms out again. You see the state. And it keeps zooming out all the way until it gets to space. And then it does the opposite. And then it zooms in. And it zooms into the couple. Then it zooms into them even closer, into the face, onto the hand. Then you see the molecules. You see the cells. You see the atoms. You see all these different things. And the whole idea there is, and I asked the CEO of IDEO, former CEO of IDEO, Tim Brown, this question, and he gave me this. Yeah, and he said that what a lot of great leaders need to be able to do, and successful people, you have to be able to zoom out to see the big picture when it makes sense. But you also need to be able to zoom in when it makes sense to understand the inner workings of how things come together and how they work. And so it very much reminded me of that the analogy that you put together, the power of 10.
I think about that zoom in, zoom out a lot. One of the things I write about in the book is this concept of mental time travel, this idea that you can pull yourself either forward or back in time and really use that as a value driver in your life. So one of the examples I give in the very outset of the book, which is one of the most powerful exercises I've ever gone through, is to imagine your ideal life at 80 years old. Imagine what your ideal day looks like. Literally close your eyes, sit down, and imagine where you are, who you're with, what you're doing, how you feel, what you're thinking about. Really sit down and envision it in deep, deep detail. And then think about what that implies in terms of how you have to live today, the actions you need to take today in order to build that future. Because what a lot of people find is that there is this enormous gap between the future that they're trying to create and the actions that they're taking in the present. Because you're chasing all of these funny things. You're chasing money, status, wealth, fame, all of these things in the present with your actions. But your future ideal life is all about people. It's all about relationships. It's all about freedom. It's all about your health. And then you're not doing anything to promote those things today. And I have found that to be such a powerful grounding exercise for people that I've gone through it with. And it's a great use case of that exact thing, of mental time travel, of the ability to zoom out, see your life from this bigger picture.
Yeah, I love that, the analogy of mental time travel. Why don't we unpack some of the components from the book? Because you have these 5 types of wealth, which I think are relevant regardless of who you are, what you do, whether you're a leader, an employee, young or old. So can you unpack, and maybe you can just list out those 5 too, and we can spend, maybe 2 minutes talking about each one and just giving kind of a high-level breakdown.
The 5 types of wealth that are explored in the book: time wealth, social wealth, mental wealth, physical wealth, and then, of course, financial wealth. And the whole idea behind the book is that your entire life you have been led to believe that money, financial wealth, is what wealth is all about, that your entire life is defined around this single type of wealth. And a lot of that is because it is so easily measured. I think it was Peter Drucker that once said, "What gets measured gets managed." And because money is such an easily measured thing, you can literally just put a single number alongside it. It's what everybody focuses on. It's how we measure ourselves. And we manage it, we optimize around it. So, what the book explores is a different way to measure and think about your life across these 5 types of wealth. So, time wealth, all about freedom. It's all about the control over your time, your ability to spend time with the people you want, your ability to do the things you want. That is time wealth. Social wealth is your connection to the people around you, both the depth and breadth of that connection, and then also how you think about your relative position within those hierarchies. So, a different way to think about status in the modern world. Mental wealth is about purpose. It's about growth. It's about creating space in your life to separate from the day-to-day, whether that's through spiritual means or through simple meditation, walks, etc. Physical wealth is all about your health and vitality. That's your ability to actually enjoy your time on the planet because you are healthy enough to do so and because you're taking the actions on a daily basis to control the controllables, as it were. And then financial wealth, as I explore it in the book, is all about figuring out what enough looks like to you and how to build a life around that version of your enough so that you're not constantly chasing this, what I think of as a liability, which is your expectations in life. You know, your expectations are actually your greatest financial liability, because if those are growing faster than your assets, you will never feel rich. You will never feel wealthy.
Yeah. Are you a chief people officer or a chief human resource officer that is responsible for the future of work and employee experience? If so, then you're going to want to check out futureofworkleaders.com. It's a new global community that I am putting together of the world's top people leaders from brands including Neiman Marcus, Johnson & Johnson, Dow, Lego, Tractor Supply, Northrop Grumman, and dozens of others. If you're interested in learning more and requesting an invite, and again, if you are a chief human or chief people officer, then head on over to futureofworkleaders.com. Yeah, that's an interesting one. I'd love to unpack that one a little bit too. It sort of reminds me, when I take my kids to school, I always remind them that there are kind of 3 workouts that they have to do every day: head, heart, and body. So I always tell them you need to do something every day to exercise your body, whether it's PE or whatever it is that you're doing. You got to do something to exercise your head. And so my daughter plays chess. She's 8 years old. My son is 4. He likes to assemble and disassemble things and play with puzzles and build stuff. And then sort of the heart. And the heart is the, hugs, I love you, talking to your kids, spending time together. So I always remind them, today, remember, we have to do these 3 workouts every single day. And it very much reminded me of those 5 types of wealth. It kind of like the 3 types of workouts.
Thinking about it with kids.
Yeah, and they kind of get it. And I always ask them when I pick them up from school, what were your workouts today? And then whatever they didn't do, we end up doing. Yeah. For little kids, they grasp it, and it's very, very easy for them to kind of conceptualize. So let's unpack your 5 types of wealth a little bit.
We can start at the top.
Which one do you want to start with? Okay. So time, this is, a lot of people struggle with this. Sometimes I struggle with this as well. Maybe even you do as well, right? Especially when you're building your own business. But I guess it's one thing when you control your time, when you work for yourself, versus if you work at a company and maybe a lot of people say, well, Sahil, that's great. I can't control my time. My boss controls my time. I have to show up to work. I'm working from 9 to 5 or 9 to 6. What do you want me to do?
I think a good way to go through this, by the way, would be with each one, let's just talk through one of the kind of tactics that I talk about in the book. So in each section of the book, there is sort of the theory around it and storytelling around it. And then there's a guide for actually building this type of wealth in your life. It might be a fun way to go through it to sort of tease each one tactic around each that people can take away from this and start going and acting on. And obviously go deeper on it by reading the book. So with time, you always have control over your energy. And you may not have control of your time right now, but you do have control over your energy. And what I mean by that is you can control energy allocation, where you are actually applying your energy during the course of the day. And if you put your energy towards things that are high leverage, towards the things that are actually moving you forward in the direction of your goals, you can accelerate meaningfully relative to where you are today. So if you choose to put your energy towards things that have 5, 10, 100x potential outcomes, that is a much better use of energy than putting your energy towards things that are 1x. They're, a simple sort of energy for money trade, if you will. And so the key there is identifying over the course of your week or month, what are the things that have the high upside within your day-to-day life. You may have to show up to the 20 Zoom meetings during the course of your week. You may have to do all of these calls, but that is very different than sitting down and thinking about, okay, well, I may have to do all those things during the day, but if there's this one project that I know has the opportunity to launch me forward, I need to make sure that I have the energy allocated towards that project so that I can really do my best work on that one thing that's going to vault me forward, whether that's in your own business or whether that's in your career, whatever track you're on. So the exercise that I lay out is what I call my energy calendar. It's this idea of during the course of the week, color code your calendar after a day is over according to whether an activity created energy for you, mark it green, whether it was energy neutral, mark it yellow, or energy draining, mark it red. At the end of the week, if you do that, you will have a very clear sense of the activities that you are feeling pulled towards, that you are feeling create value and create energy in your life. Now, your goal after seeing that is to allocate and prioritize those energy creating tasks. Allocate towards those things that are going to be driving you forward, that are creating energy, creating value within your life.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember who I was talking to before. It was a CEO from a company, and he was telling me that how he spends his time versus where he distributes his energy is not the same thing. And he said that there might be some times where he spends a lot of time on something, and maybe that'll give him, it'll drain his energy, but he might spend a little bit of time on something else that gives him energy. And he said that he very much thinks about the time that he uses versus the energy he has to contribute or the energy that he gets back as two very, very different things. So I love that you kind of break that apart. But in your case, even let's say you even do that. And I realize, well, these 20 Zoom meetings they're draining my energy every week. But I can't really control that. So then what do I do? Or are you saying you should take steps to try to minimize those energy
Over
drainers
periods of
from your
time,
calendar?
you should take steps to mitigate energy draining things. An example of that very literally with the Zoom meetings. I was in that position. I did hundreds of Zoom meetings. What I found was that a Zoom meeting might be very energy draining, but a walking phone call or Zoom meeting might be energy neutral or even energy creating because I find I have energy when I walk. You can probably shift 3 to 5 of those towards being walking meetings. Some of them you have to be at your desk and you have to be on video. Some of them you probably don't if you really thought about it. That's just a simple example of a tiny intervention that can dramatically change the amount of energy you have at the end of your week. You take 10, 15, 20% of those energy draining events and you made them energy neutral or energy creating. And suddenly by the end of the week, you feel a lot different than you did before. And so it's thinking, it's questioning a little bit, how can I tweak some of these things that are energy draining and make them energy creating? An example from my own life right now, book launch, with my whole process around this book launch, there's a lot of things that I find energy draining about it. A lot of the boring, basic blocking and tackling and things that you have to do, I don't find energy creating. It's draining for me. But there are aspects like the creative side of it that are very energy creating for me. So the question I need to ask myself then is, how can I make this whole launch more creative? How can I actually make it feel fun? How can I make it feel easier in that same way?
Yeah. And I guess you can also balance some of the energy draining things with the creative things too, right? Because, even if you can't do anything with those Zoom meetings, I guess one strategy that you can implement is try to figure out how can you add some of those energy creating activities while you have maybe some of those energy draining activities and try to offset that. But even, it's funny, I was doing a workshop with a series of leaders and they had that same problem. They were Zoom meetings nonstop. And they acknowledged, they're like, yeah, we don't even need to be in a lot of these meetings. And I said, well, why don't you just say no? Why don't you just give your employees more accountability to make decisions? Because a lot of the Zoom meetings were just, we want to give you an update on what's going on. And these are things that could be done by an email. So I guess even if you're an employee at a company and you're doing 20, 25 Zoom meetings a week, you can push back a little bit and tell your team or tell your leaders and just say, hey, look, can we do this over an email? Or can I just show up for the first 5 or 10 minutes? And try to come up with some suggestions to help minimize your Zoom fatigue that so many
Yeah, or
people
just do it,
have been
right? Like,
experiencing. So
say you are going to lead a meeting that is a
yeah,
weekly meeting. If you, before that weekly meeting, like an hour before it, just send out a like 1-page memo and just say, if people want to get their time back, here's a memo that breaks down the entire thing. We can run through this in about 5 minutes on a call. Or if people feel like they sort of get it from this memo, we can give everyone their time back. I guarantee you most people will take you up on giving them their time back because everyone feels that same thing. So if you take the initiative to do that, now you can set the tone, excuse me, around the entire thing and change the narrative within a company.
yeah, that makes sense. All right, let's
Yeah.
move on to the next one because I know we only have a
Let's
couple
go
minutes
social
left.
wealth.
Which
So-
one do you want to go to?
Social wealth is all about your
Okay.
relationships and the both depth of the kind of core relationships and the breadth of your broader relationships within the world. We'll do a quick one here from an exercise standpoint. So this is one of my favorites. It's called Helped, Heard, or Hugged. And this is a framework really for depth and your deeper relationships. And what it is a simple question that you ask when someone comes to you with a problem. So whether it's your partner, whether it's a friend, and they're talking to you, venting to you, whatever it might be about an issue that they're facing, you literally ask, do you want to be helped, heard, or hugged? And the question is asking, do you want advice? Do you want me to just listen? Or do you want touch? Do you just want me to kind of hear you and then give you a hug? This has solved so many problems that I've experienced in my own romantic relationship with my wife. Because what I realized was my nature as a business person, as a man, is to be a fixer. And there's probably a lot of people on the call that have experienced this. You're a fixer. Yeah. You want to give the advice. You want to try to help. You want to fix the problem. And it would drive my wife nuts. All she really wanted was for me to listen and then to give her a hug. And doing that and realizing that and asking this question so that I could create the pattern in my own mind has really transformed our relationship in terms of the communication around any issues that come up. At least the first few times, yes. If you don't have the pattern created yet in a situation, like now I know, right? I don't need to ask my wife if she's, venting about something, family, work, whatever it might be. I know what she wants from me. But in a newer relationship, I would ask, like, do you want advice around this thing, or do you simply just want me to hear you?
Yeah, the social one's really important because there's a lot of data out there, I think especially around Gen Z, saying that they're lonely, they're depressed, they're anxious, they're not prepared for the workplace. And this kind of goes back to one of the themes I mentioned earlier around these well-being programs. So for the social component, how do you see the interplay between your personal accountability and responsibility and the role that work plays? Because a lot of people do get some social connection from work, but at the same time, you can't only get your social connection from work. So how do you balance that responsibility between what the company should do for the social versus what you as an individual should be doing for the social?
I think this is almost entirely on you and personal because everyone experiences social connection differently. I might be introverted and I might feel lonely if I don't spend time with one person in depth per week. But you might be extroverted and you might need to spend time with 20 people in depth per week in order to feel energized and feel like you are connected. So it is so personal that it's hard to kind of create a blanket corporate policy that actually connects with tons of different people. But as you said, I would argue this is the most important thing for people to consider and think about is fighting back against this loneliness epidemic that we are in. I mean, teenagers are spending 70% less time with their friends in person than they were 2 decades ago. 70%. And it's probably social media. People are sitting on their phones, right? And they feel like they're connected when in reality, they're not seeing the person sitting right in front of them. And it's a terrifying trend because we know the data is out there. Loneliness leads to higher risk of dementia, it leads to higher all-cause mortality, it leads to all of these enormous problems, especially as you get older in life. And so building those bonds, prioritizing that depth with that group of people is so, so important.
I mean, I remember when I was a kid and it was, you wanted to hang out with friends. It'd be like, all right, Mom, I'm going outside to play. And I used to live on a street in Granada Hills in Los Angeles. And We would all play street hockey, roller hockey outside. There was no phones. You barely had internet, dial-up at the time. We would play like Nintendo and Super Nintendo, but everyone was together and everyone was outside. And, as I mentioned, I have 2 kids, an 8-year-old and a 4-year-old. And of course they are nowhere near phones. The only time my kids go on screens is if my daughter is playing chess, working on our chess homework. But yeah, it's totally crazy. Even now you see people walking their dogs outside, and these are, we're talking about grown adults, and they're walking their dogs and they're staring down at their phones. And I've had people like almost walk into me because they don't look anymore. They're constantly at a screen. So it's crazy. I think how addictive some of these things are. And I love that you said it's almost always on you, because I think the assumption that a lot of people are putting out there is that, well, I don't need to exercise. I don't need to eat healthy. I don't need to make time for anything social. And I'm just going to show up to work and say, hey, I'm lonely. I'm disengaged at work. Fix my problem. And my big frustration with a lot of organizations that are doing these programs is that they're not putting any accountability and responsibility on the employees. And so what happens when you inevitably leave that company? You feel like you can't handle the world. You're not prepared to exist. And I think it does require a little bit of tough love. It should be all on you. Make friends, go outside, join a church, go to a synagogue, whatever you got to do. You got to build those social connections. It's so important.
Yeah, and it's the same as any investment. I mean, I know we're running short on time. I think
Yeah.
with all of these types of wealth, one of the most important things that I get across and try to in the book is that the same principles as your financial investments apply to these other types of wealth. They compound over periods of time. So the investments that you make in your social wealth, in the relationships early in your life, compound over the years. Similarly, if you don't do anything, if you neglect those people close to you, they will not be there for you later in life. If you don't take the time to send that text to the person you love, to your family member, to that close friend, if you don't stay in touch, those relationships atrophy. We know that with money. We know that if we don't make those investments, we're not going to have the financial stuff there later. But with these other types of wealth, it's the exact same principle. With your physical health, if you don't do anything in your 20s, 30s, and 40s, your health will not be there for you in your 50s and 60s and beyond. And so that is really important. These don't exist on an infinite time horizon. You have to invest now, even if it's some tiny amount. Anything above 0 compounds positively. So do the tiny little thing. You exist, your life happens across seasons. There's different seasons of life and different seasons where you will prioritize different things. But every one of these areas exists on a dimmer switch, not an on-off switch. You don't turn off your physical health. You don't turn off your social wealth during these periods of time. You need to focus on those high leverage systems that you can execute on. Even if you're not prioritizing it during a season, keep it on slightly with those couple of things, those couple actions, the couple texts you send, the one annual trip that you do with those friends, those little things that keep the spark there so that you can continue to thrive out years and years into the future.
All right. Maybe we can have time for one last one, and then to get the rest, people are going to have to grab your book.
Let's do mental wealth because
Okay.
there's enough podcasts on money purely. So on
Yes.
mental wealth, look, this is about purpose. This is about growth. This is about engaging your mind on a daily basis, and that the idea that when you stop learning, that's when you start dying. I think one of the most interesting practices anyone can implement immediately is, I call it the think day. Now, this is an adaptation of Bill Gates, who had this think week concept where he would go off the grid for an entire week to just
I remember
sit
that.
and think. No one, at least that I know, can take an entire week to just leave and go live in a cabin somewhere, right? Like we have kids, we have jobs, we have responsibilities. Find one day each quarter where you can block your calendar and spend time actually thinking about the bigger picture in your life and in your work. And ask yourself, I have a list of 8 questions in the book that I ask myself on these days. Big picture questions. If someone observed my actions for a week, what would they say my priorities are? That's one of my absolute favorite questions to ask. If they observed me for a week, what would they say my priorities are? Because we have this whole set of things that we would say are our priorities. That if someone asked me what my priorities are, I would tell them, oh, my priorities are family, my priorities are friendships, all these things. But if you observed me, would you agree that those are my priorities, or would it be totally disjointed from what I just said? Those type of questions, engage yourself to kind of pull out and see the bigger picture in your life on a quarterly basis, have an unbelievable power for vaulting you forward, for accelerating your progress in all of these different areas.
Yeah, I love that. And that seems like it's something anybody can do. So you take a sick day at work if you need to.
Yeah, or do it in an hour, right? Like take a day, great. If you can take 2 hours one morning and just put yourself into a different space, like go to a coffee shop and just sit, or, go like sit in a courtyard, sit outside, go for a walk, whatever it might be. It's separating yourself from what your normal environment is so that you can put yourself into a different headspace and just think differently about your life.
I love it. Yeah, we don't spend enough time doing that. The thinking aspect. Everyone is so heads down, jumping from task to task, fighting fire, that it's so important to have that time to think. So I love that you mentioned that. It's a perfect way to wrap up. Why don't you let people know where can they go grab a copy of your book? You want to mention your newsletter, your account on X. You're very prolific on there. I mean Twitter, and anything else that you want to mention for people to check out.
Yeah, you can order the book now, really anywhere books are sold. Amazon, Barnes & Noble, anywhere books are sold. You can also find more information on it and claim exclusive bonuses at the5typesofwealth.com. And then you can find me at Sahil Bloom on any of the major platforms or my website, sahilbloom.com.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for taking time out of your day. I really appreciate it. And thank you, everyone, for tuning in and for listening and watching. You can make sure to grab a copy of his book. What is the exact date?
February 4th.
February 4th. Okay. So we still got a little bit of time, but pre-orders, I saw it's already doing quite well based on your X posts. So congrats on that. And hopefully everybody listening and watching will go grab a copy. Thanks for tuning in to today's episode of Future Ready Leadership. If you want to get access to more content on how you can become future ready, make sure to subscribe to the newsletter. It's thefutureorganization.com/newsletter. And if you enjoyed this episode, please send it to somebody who you would like to see become a better leader. Thanks for listening or watching, and I will see you next time.